All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today. We're on lesson 2 of creating Gaia's garden. And this is one that I'm really excited about. I am such a complete geek when it comes to soil. And soil is the foundation of nutrition, of health, of growing good vegetables, of a healthy planet, of all civilizations. So soil is really, really important, and I have a lot of fun with it, and I've learned a lot about soil for sure. As I've said, I love soil, and we're just going to cruise in here. And so what we're going to cover, just the basics. What is soil? What matters in soil structure? Just the overview. What is soil made of? And then really, how does soil create fertility, nutrition, and all of those sorts of things. Some practical stuff on how to build the organic matter content of soil. And we'll look at a few methods pretty briefly. I'm not going to go into methods in much depth just because those are so easy to get from other places. There's tons of books on how to do composting and how to use cover crops properly and all the other things like that. I will at least introduce those methods and let you know what they are. But I'm not going to go into any detail on exactly how to do that stuff because there's plenty of information out there and we all develop our favorite techniques for building up soil. And I'm definitely going to spend some time on minerals in soil because they are often overlooked. A lot of people really work just with organic matter, and the mineral content of soil is really important. And it's the key to a healthy food, the food that's got lots of nutrients in it. To anything that eats that food being healthy itself. So if you're a meat eater, you want to be eating animals that are raised on nutrient-dense food, or the animals themselves are not going to have a lot of nutrients in them. So minerals are really a key element in soil that have been neglected by a lot of organically oriented folks. All right. So I want to tell a little story about how I learned about soil in the first place. When I kind of left my career in genetics, my wife and I moved down to Southern Oregon and bought 10 acres, and we were going to do the whole back to the land thing. That was in the very early 1990s. We were going to grow a whole bunch of our own food, be as self-sufficient as we possibly could. And the place that we bought, there had been one other couple that had owned it before us who had moved into a clear cut there and built an organic garden and fenced in about 6,000 square feet or so, pretty good size, 60 by 80 foot deer fence garden, put in some, worked on the soil. And so the very first summer I planted all sorts of stuff. I had done a bunch of gardening before, so I felt I knew what I was doing. And what was weird was that although I was watering and fertilizing and doing all sorts of things to the soil, things just didn't look good. By July or so, the tomatoes were all stunted and everything was yellow and plants were really small. And it was really upsetting because I was working really hard. And the whole point of what we were doing was to grow a lot of food and do all these, to sustain ourselves, partly at least, off of our land. And I can remember going in from the garden one day to my wife and just say, we're not going to make it out here. I was really upset. And my wife kind of patted me on the head and said, look, let's pretend that you have some scientific training. And I thought a minute and, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, how would I approach this problem if I were going to be a little bit less emotional about it and a little more scientific? And I realized, let's do a soil test. That was the first thing. And I didn't want to take the time to take a soil sample and mail it out and have it come back in a couple weeks later. But I had some pH paper from my old lab job and realized, I can at least check the acidity and alkalinity of the soil and see how that's doing. So that's what I did. And I want to stop for a minute and talk about the importance of pH and scale. So this is a graphic showing the pH scale, which goes for various technical reasons from 0 to 14, the lower numbers being more acidic and the higher numbers being more alkaline or basic. And I think we're all pretty familiar with acidity. Lemon juice and battery acid and things like that are really acidic. Soft drinks, Coca-Cola and things like that have a lot of phosphoric acid in them, so they're quite acidic. And then on the opposite end of the scale, we've got things like ammonia that are really alkaline. Green cleaner of different sorts is unbelievably alkaline or caustic. And I think we're more familiar with acid than alkaline, but if you've ever spilled a little bit of ammonia on your fingers or gotten drain cleaner, heaven forbid, or anything like that on your fingers, you notice that they get really slippery. They get like almost greasy, and that's because this alkaline stuff, the ammonia or whatever it is actually turning your skin into soap, because that's the old soap making process that people used to use. They would take wood ash, which is actually potash, potassium. The word potassium is that's one of the principal ingredients in ash, in wood ash, and they would mix wood ash with water, and that would make this something called lye, L-Y-E, that was terrifically alkaline. And then they would put fat in it, olive oil or beef tallow or something like that, and that would render the fat into soap. So you don't want to get too much of that stuff on you. It's really, really potent. And then down in the middle of the scale, like absolutely pure distilled water is right in the center. You can see it's pH 7. And again, I'm not going to explain why that scale is what it is, but 7 is neutral. It's not acid, it's not alkaline, it's right in the middle. So absolutely pure water is pH 7. And if you go down 1 point to pH 6, towards the acid, that is 10 times more acidic than water is, than pure water is. It's a logarithmic scale, so 1 point is a tenfold change. And then pH 5 is 100 times more acidic than pH 7 is, and pH 4 is 1,000 times more acidic, and so on. So by the time you get down to something like lemon juice, we're talking 100,000, even up to 1,000,000 times more acidic than water is. So it's really potent when you're changing pH. And people who live in humid areas, like places where there's a lot of rainfall, like the eastern US, Western Europe, the Pacific Northwest, the more humid parts of Australia, places like that, generally their soils tend to be acidic because rainwater washes out the alkaline minerals from your soil, leaving behind acid stuff. And then if you live in the desert or a pretty dry place, a place where evaporation exceeds precipitation, then your soil is probably a little bit alkaline, like pH 8, pH 8.5, something like that. So I was expecting, because I was in the Pacific Northwest, that either this would be like the native soil, pH 5, pH 5.5, something like that, which is the soils out in the Douglas fir forests, or else I figured it would be around neutral because it was garden soil, and gardeners like to make their soil around 6.5 to 7 or so. And I tested the soil, and the pH was 8.5. And I was just, it's like, oh, well, that tells me some of the problem right there, because that's like living in the salt flats or something. It's just crazy for the pH to be 8.5. And just to show you why that matters, here is a little indicator of how the pH of the soil affects the ability of plants to get access to different nutrients. So it turns out that inside that green box there, pH 7, pH 6 or so, that's the kind of sweet spot for most minerals to be maximally available. The plants can get enough nitrogen, phosphorus, all those things. And then the trace elements down there at the bottom, like iron and manganese and boron, copper and zinc, those sorts of things, they're actually a little more active down in the acidic range, but they're pretty active in the neutral range. And as you can see, that if we get down into the acidic range for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all the kind of big guns down there, very quickly they become unavailable at acid pH. And they also, pretty much all of them become much less available, or many of them become much less available at alkaline pH. So what was happening to me was I had this soil that was really alkaline, and not many minerals were available to the plants because of that. And a lot of plants just don't like high pH. They just don't grow well. You get desert plants like saltbush and things like that that like it, but most garden plants want a pH of 6.5, pH 7. So I realized, oh, that's part of the problem. And I actually found out that the previous owners had dumped all of their wood ash from all of the wood stove. They would burn like 4 cords of wood a year in the wood stove and dump all the wood ash into the garden. And that's going to trash the soil. That's going to fill it with lye, basically, with wood ash is pH 13, pH 12. So there was that. And also they had a gray water system that turned out to be incredibly alkaline too. So they were just pouring alkaline stuff onto the soil and really poisoning it. So I realized, okay, I can either give up on this garden and build a whole new garden, cut down a bunch of trees, and put up an 8-foot deer fence, and try to build a whole new garden, or I can try and rehabilitate the soil. And being a new permaculturist, I thought, well, the responsible thing is to rebuild the soil. So I took it upon myself to learn a lot about soil and how could I get the pH down. So I wanted to describe a way that a lot of permaculturists think in terms of how to fix things. And this is one of my mentors and someone who really I learned a lot from. Tom Ward taught my first permaculture course, and he's really one of my most important mentors. And so he talks about doing a quick fix or a retrofit or ultimate permaculture, but we start with the quick fix. Like, for example, if you've got a roof gutter that's leaking, the quick fix is just stick a bucket underneath the leak and collect that water. And then a retrofit would be, a little bit more work than the quick fix. You go out and you get a rain barrel or a tank or something, and you put that in the, underneath the leaky gutter. But that's still kind of a temporary solution. And then ultimate permaculture is where you redesign the whole system, where you, create an entire rainwater harvesting system, irrigation, and all the things like that will, that really, you're doing a permaculture design to upgrade the system completely. So I was thinking, okay, so what can I do in these terms, using Tom Ward's 3 levels of solutions to take care of my soil problem? So the quick fix for raising, let's see, so if most people in humid areas have a problem with their soil being too acid, and most people are more familiar with how to make soil more alkaline, because that's the more common problem in a lot of places. So I want to start there. That wasn't the problem that I had, but more people have problems with pH being too acidic, and they're trying to raise the pH to be more alkaline. So the quick fix there is to get lime, which is the chemical contained in lime is calcium carbonate, or you can use other sources that are similar, like finely ground oyster shell. But lime is from limestone, it's ground up limestone, and it very quickly reacts with the water in the soil to release various substances that will raise the pH and bring it up, from less acid to more alkaline. And that's a very common thing for a lot of people who live in humid areas, and farmers use immense amount of lime every year. The worldwide consumption of lime is unbelievable. It is a non-renewable resource, but there's a lot of limestone out there. So there's a lot of it around, but it's heavy and it has to be mined. And so ideally we could move away from quick fixes like that, although a lot of farming, they just always use lime. And there are forms of lime that have just calcium in them, but there's another form of lime called dolomite lime that's got magnesium in it as well. And if you add that without thinking about it, you can add too much magnesium into your soil and cause trouble. So, but the longer term solution is to add organic matter. And then ultimate permaculture is to create a self-renewing fertility system where the plants themselves, you've got trees and shrubs that are putting nitrogen in the soil, harvesting minerals from deep in the soil and bringing them up to the surface, recycling all the nutrients that are already present. And that's how nature does it. And so we want to shoot for something like that, but it will take years to get that set up. So I needed a quick fix. And so for my problem, to lower the pH, to make it more acidic, is to add something called gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. And the sulfur in there reacts with water in the soil to make sulfuric acid. So that will make your soil more acidic. And it's allowed by organic certified companies, just like, or agencies, just the way lime is. And then there are other things that can make your soil more acidic, like sulfur or something called lime sulfur or iron sulfate. All of those things make a kind of a sulfuric acid thing in your soil. But again, you know, it's a chemical and it's a short-term solution, and you can put way too much sulfur in your soil if you do it too often. So the retrofit is the same as with raising pH, which is to add organic matter, because that just helps absorb any problem elements that are in your soil. Organic matter can hold huge amounts of nutrients and all sorts of minerals. And so by adding organic matter, you buffer your pH problems. You greatly reduce them without having to mess directly with the pH itself. And then it's the same answer for ultimate permaculture. You want to create a self-renewing fertility system, a food forest, basically, or something that will generate its own fertility. And over the next two classes, lessons 3 and 4, I'm going to talk much more about how to create these self-renewing fertility systems. So let's see. So what I did was to add gypsum, and that got my pH down to around 7.5 or so right in the first season. But I also was able to get a huge amount of ground up wood chips from the power company who came by. They were actually putting in new power lines on a road, and they were cutting down all sorts of trees and chipping up all the wood waste, and they delivered it all to me. So I had a pile. It was huge. It was like, you know, 30 feet by 30 feet by 8 feet high. It was gigantic. They brought by a 10-yard dump truck every day for a week and just filled up this huge area with organic matter. And I just mulched my entire garden a foot thick with that, except for a couple of little beds that I was planning on using that year that I did use more gypsum on. But that was my retrofit, and I was very lucky in getting all that organic matter. It's hard for people to come up with 5,000 square feet worth of organic matter. So that's how I worked on that problem, but I still had much more to go. I really needed to improve the organic matter content of the soil, to build the minerals back up, and all sorts of things like that. So let's look at how you do that sort of thing. First, we need to know what is soil made of, and this little pie chart shows what's going on in soil. It's actually, there's a lot of air in soil, and this would be a good garden soil. This is not a compacted, badly abused soil. This is a healthy soil out of a forest or out of a prairie or out of a really good garden. And so 20 to 30% air, because plants need air around their roots, and all the soil organisms need air. And then 20 to 30% water or so. And those numbers, of course, are going to be really variable. They'll depend on when it last rained and how your soil's been taken care of and all that sort of thing. And then about 45% of any soil is just ground up rock. It's sand or silt or clay is all that means. And then anywhere from, it's not just 5%, it's really anywhere from almost 0 to up to 10 or 12% is the organic part. In other words, it's either stuff that is alive, like earthworms and insects and bacteria and fungi and all sorts of things like that, or else it's stuff that used to be alive, like leaves and wood chips and other forms of dead organic matter. And what we're trying to do in a lot of soils is to raise that number to something reasonable, because a lot of farms that have been chemically farmed for many years are down at less than 1% organic matter, and that's going to give you all sorts of problems that if we have time today, I would talk about. But mostly I want to talk about how to do good things to soil rather than how to solve all the problems that you can have. So I want to concentrate on the minerals and the organic matter in soil. So here's a little bit about the mineral content of soil. There are 3 main, and so all minerals are things that come from rocks. Down underneath the soil is bedrock and ground up rock, and as that gets ground up, first the largest size particles are sand. Well, actually there's gravel that can be bigger than that. But we all know how big a grain of sand is. And this shows the relative sizes. The only difference between sand and silt is that silt is like 1% the size of sand. So if you were to hold a grain of silt up to a grain of sand, this is roughly what it would look like, is something much, much smaller. And both sand and silt look very much like the rock that they came from. If you'll parent rock. Down in the bedrock there is granite. Then you're going to have a granitic sand and granitic silt. And someone who knows a little bit of geology could actually look at the sand and the silt and say, oh, that's from granite, or that's from basalt, or that's from feldspar, something like that. And then there's clay, and you can see clay particles are really, really tiny compared to sand. I mean, they're 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 times smaller than sand. And clay has been really heavily weathered. It doesn't look like the parent rock. It takes a very special type of clay chemist to be able to identify clays and tell you what they're made of. Clay chemistry is really hairy stuff, and only specialists really can get into it. But those are the things that are in the mineral part of soil. It's ground up rock, and there's a really cool three-dimensional graph that people use to tell what their soil's composition is in terms of sand, silt, and clay. And on the left side of this triangle, what you've got is the percentage of clay going from 0% up to 100%. And so we've got these tick marks here run across horizontally, whatever percentage they're at. And then coming around to the right side, the right axis is the percentage of silt going from 0 up to 100%. And then down at the bottom axis, we've got a percentage of clay, again going from 0 to 100%. And what you wind up with here is when you fill in all the blanks, you get a graph that, let's see, is that the one? Oh, there we go. There's the nice one that's in color. That's the one I want. And you can see that you get things like straight clay. Clay is really potent, so only a little bit of clay in soil goes a long way. You can see how clay kind of dominates this whole chart. That's because anytime you've got more than about 35% clay or so, your soil is just going to behave like clay. Clay sort of dominates. It takes over the soil. If there's more than, roughly, well, even 25% clay, it's going to make it a pretty clayey soil. Like over on the left, that sandy clay loam, you can see the word clay is in there, even though there's only 20% clay. Clay is really powerful. And then right in the center, you see there's that term loam. I'd always wondered, what's loam? I know what sand is and silt and clay. People talk about loam soil. And loam is a perfect blend of clay and silt and sand. It's a little bit less than 30% clay, because again, clay is so powerful, you want less than an even split of sand, silt, and clay. You want like 20% clay or so. And then about 40% sand and about 40% silt. And that will make loam, it's the farmer's favorite soil. They will look for loam. And around here, in my part of California, you notice all the old apple orchards that were planted by the Italians and Portuguese who first settled in here after European contact. All of the loamy soils here have the first apple orchards on them because they knew that's the soil you really want to get a hold of first in order to farm. But this is a soil texture map, texture chart is what it's called. And it's how people identify their soil. And what you can do is to find out what your soil is made of by doing this mason jar or quart jar soil test, where you take a 1 quart jar and you fill it about half full of soil that you have taken from your garden from about 4 to 6 inches down under the ground. Those of you who are more metric, which is most of the rest of the world, I hope you can do the conversions from inches. But and if you want, you can take several samples. You can take some from the native soil if there is any around your house. You can take some from the garden, and then you bust up the clumps. If you want to be a little more careful with it and a little more exact, you can dry out the soil a bit, and then really break it up finely. And then you put the soil back in the jar, so it's half full, and then you add water up to near the top, and then you shake it for really a solid minute. You really want to get it really well mixed in with the water, and then you just set it down on the table and watch it settle. And you can see that picture up in the top right. After 1 minute, the sand has settled out. And then after the next, it's about, sand settles out in a few seconds. And then after about 30 seconds to 2 minutes or so, the silt layer will have settled out. And then after a day, some of the clay will have settled out, although some clays are so fine that they can take a week to settle out. And some clays never do settle out, they just stay in suspension. But this is a way that you can tell what your soil is made of, and that helps you figure out what kind of rootstocks to use if you're planting fruit trees, because some fruit trees prefer clay soils and some like sandy soils, some different rootstocks. So it's really useful to know this. It'll help you figure out how much moisture your soil is going to hold, all sorts of things like that. So it's a handy dandy little test to do, to just get basic information about what's going on in your garden. So as I said, I want to focus on these two things, the minerals, which are, that's what comes from the rocks, and they are the source of nutrients in your soil. They modify the pH, and they really dictate a lot of the qualities of the crops that you're growing, how healthy and nutritious those crops are, and also how healthy the animals that eat those crops, and that also includes us. So you want lots of minerals in your soil. You want those minerals to be well balanced so that you don't have an imbalanced soil with too much of this and not enough of that. And then I'm also going to focus on the organic matter content of the soil. Do we have enough life in the soil? And I'm going to talk very soon about exactly why the organic matter content is so important. Now, my training is in genetics, as I've said, and chemistry is a language that I'm really familiar with. And I'm going to use a little bit of chemistry here, but I'm going to keep it really simple. It's just that chemistry is a really good language to talk about soil, and just like French is the language of love, and all sorts of things like that. Sanskrit is the language of spirituality. Chemistry is the language of soils. And like most of us, I was traumatized by a chemistry class in school. I hated it. I was scared of it. But since then, I've learned that chemistry really can help you as a language. So I'm going to do a teeny bit of chemistry, but it's going to be, I hope I can make it simple enough so that no one's intimidated, no one goes running off, what was he talking about? So just with that little warning, please stay with me rather than tuning out and going, oh, chemistry, I hate chemistry. I'll try and keep it nice and simple for you. So here's how fertility is created. So a leaf or some piece of organic matter lands on the soil, and first various large creatures, relatively large creatures, get a hold of it, like earthworms or grubs, or little animals like voles or field mice, or little four-legged critters like that. They get a hold of it and they shred it. They chop it up with their mouths. They grind it up into little particles, and then usually they excrete those particles like manure coming from an herbivore, coming out of a cow or a horse or something like that. Still has a lot of recognizable organic matter. Those of you who have used horse manure, it's still got viable seeds in it. It mostly gets shredded and not completely digested away to nothing. So that's the first step, is it gets shredded up, which exposes a lot more edge. It creates a lot more surfaces for other things in the soil to grab a hold of it and decompose it further. And so what happens is, after it's been shredded, then bacteria and fungi get a hold of this shredded organic matter and start to break it down chemically. So what I've got here, and again, don't worry if you don't speak chemistry, just look at those little C's, which each one stands for carbon. There are lots of C's in here. We talk about life having a carbon backbone. Carbon is the basic building block of life. So there's mostly carbon in any living thing, like protein, starch, vitamins, minerals, almost anything contains, and by minerals I mean the kinds of minerals that are bound up in your body with other things. But enzymes, hormones, anything, wood, anything that is living is mostly carbon, or that was living. And then, so I've got showing you all the carbon there. There's lots and lots of carbon. And then every now and then there's a mineral stuck to it. A mineral, in this case, simply means an element that came out of the rocks. Like in red circles, I've circled all the nitrogens, because nitrogen is a really important plant nutrient. It's really important in photosynthesis. The chlorophyll, the heart of photosynthesis, the actual chemical that does photosynthesis, has a lot of nitrogen in it. So that's why when you add nitrogen to your soil, plants get greener. Proteins have nitrogen in them. All kinds of things have nitrogen, but not too much. It's like there's usually about a 12-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. And like you can see in this molecule here, there's a little bit more than 12-to-1. This is particularly nitrogen rich, but on average, if you look at all the chemicals that make up life, it's about 12 carbon atoms per 1 nitrogen atom. That's the formula for life. And then the green arrow points to a sulfur atom that's in there. So every now and then there'll be something else, a sulfur or a phosphorus or a potassium or something like that. But that's what living things are. It's just carbon backbones with every now and then a nitrogen or a sulfur. You can ignore all the hydrogens, all the H's. We don't need to think about those. But every now and then there'll be a mineral like a nitrogen or a sulfur or a phosphorus or a potassium or something like that stuck on there. And those come from the rocks. And then the carbon comes from the air, the carbon dioxide in the air, or it can come from other organic matter that's been consumed. Like when I eat, I'm eating a lot of carbon, and although a lot of that is going off into the air as carbon dioxide, as a waste product, some of it's going in to make up my body. And that's the fate of a lot of the carbon from the food that anything eats, is it helps make their body. So the bonds between carbon, when carbon sticks together, it's like they lock, like someone loading a dart gun, kind of click, and there's a spring in there. It's like it's loaded with energy. When two carbons come together, it's like cocking a loaded spring or something. And there's energy stored in that bond between the two carbons. And then when bacteria or fungi, principally, those are the ones who do a lot of this, when they break down carbon compounds, what they're doing is snapping those bonds open, and each one releases energy. Every time a carbon-carbon bond is broken, there's this flash of energy that comes from it. And the bacteria or fungi or whatever gets that energy. And we do the same thing. When we eat food, we're breaking these carbon bonds and supplying us with energy to do other things. So we're transferring energy from the food we eat into us to power our little, you can think of carbon-carbon bonds as little batteries that are delivering a constant flow of energy to you. So the organism then gets the thing that did the eating, gets the energy that was stored in that carbon bond. So carbon has two really important roles. One is to provide energy, and the other one is to provide structure. It's the backbone of all these compounds, like starches and proteins and all those sorts of things. So it's got two major jobs: providing energy and also providing structure, just by being a building block. So then the other part, the minerals, are really important. Like you can see this molecule here that I'm showing, that's actually one of the vitamin B types called thiamine. I think most of us have heard of thiamine. And anyone who's taking a multiple vitamin, you're getting some thiamine. And thiamine has nitrogen and sulfur in it, are the two principal minerals that are being delivered to you when you get thiamine. And so you need nitrogen and sulfur in order to build thiamine. And you need various other minerals in order to build all sorts of other things in you. The vitamins in you. DNA needs phosphorus, and it needs nitrogen, and it needs various other things. Protein needs sulfur and a lot of nitrogen and things like that. So when bacteria and fungi eat things in the soil, they're breaking all these bonds down and slowly releasing nitrogens and sulfurs and phosphorus are all being released into the soil so that other things then can eat them. So the bacteria and fungi are not only getting them from themselves, they're delivering surplus to the soil so that other things can get these minerals as well. So that's why you want a lot of organic matter in your soil, because that imports a lot of these minerals as well as energy in the form of carbon and structure in the form of carbon. And it creates food for all the soil organisms like bacteria and fungi that are really, really important, which then deliver these nutrients to wherever they need to go, to the soil so that plants can get a hold of them, to other organisms. But that's basically what happens when any organic matter, leaf litter, whatever it is, That's what happens when organic matter breaks down. Is there's this release of energy, a transfer of energy, and the minerals and things like that get transferred to whoever eats them or transferred to the soil so that other organisms like plants can pick them up. So if you don't have enough minerals in your soil, you're not going to get healthy, nutritious plants, and you, when you eat those plants, aren't going to get the nutrition and the minerals from them. So that's why we want to have a good level of organic matter in our soil, because it allows all these other organisms to grow that will help break down that organic matter and deliver it around. So that's how fertility is created. Fertility is about flow. It's not about just storing stuff in the soil. It's about a constant delivery of stuff to the soil. Leaf litter, and erosion from the bedrock coming up. And that flow then powers all the life in the soil to break down all these organic compounds and constantly release energy and nutrients to you. So yeah, that's the sum up, is soil organisms transfer energy and important nutrients to plants and other living beings. And they all are carbon bonds and structure and nitrogen and sulfur and all of those things. All right, so to have a healthy soil then, I'm summing up what I just said. You need lots of organic matter, lots of soil life, and soil life will just come. When you bring organic matter to the soil, the living things will just arrive because there's food for them. They'll just blow in on spores or come in from everywhere. And you want soil that's got lots of minerals in it, with all the major elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then the minor elements like calcium, magnesium, and then all these things we call trace elements, which are iron, zinc, and copper, and boron, and many, many more, manganese, and molybdenum, and all sorts of things like that. Those are all crucial minerals that are found in living processes. Your body has got quite a bit of little things like selenium and molybdenum in them, because they play such important roles in helping enzymes work so that they can break down your food or can build the hormones that you need and build everything you need. So those are the things we've got to have in soil. So how do we do that? How do we build healthy soil? First, the problems in most soil, not all soils, but most soils that have been used for a while in farming, particularly chemical farming, really almost any kind of farming, but the most brilliant, fastidious, careful soil management, pretty much any soil that's been farmed or gardened for a while is going to be depleted of organic matter. And so that's the leverage point. If you add organic matter to your soil, chances are it's going to eliminate a whole bunch of the problems that you've got in your soil. It's the first step. Maybe your soil has enough organic matter in it, but the chances are that unless you've been deliberately working to build organic matter, most soils that we've been gardening or farming for a while have lost a lot of the organic matter. So the first high leverage point, low-hanging fruit, get the most bang for your buck thing to do is to increase organic matter. And you can do that by composting. You can do that by adding mulch. That's my favorite way. It's just pour mulch onto the soil. And I'll use anything and get my hands on. I mean, seaweed if I'm near the ocean, straw if I'm near a place where they grow greens, wood chips if I'm near a forest, ideally with a lot of green leaves mixed in, because wood chip is mostly carbon. And I mentioned you want this 12-to-1 ratio of carbon and nitrogen. Wood chips are like 80-to-1, so you got to bring in some manure or something that's got a lot of nitrogen in it. Worm bins are a great way to build organic matter. If you have a small yard or an apartment, you just make a little bit of really rich compost with a worm bin. You can also do something called cover cropping that I will talk about later, but it's essentially just growing specific plants in your garden that are designed or have been bred to increase organic matter content. And also proper livestock management, whether it's small ones like rabbits and chickens, but in particular larger ones like cattle and sheep. If you manage them well, you can build the fertility of your soil. Mostly they are not managed well, and they strip the fertility from the soil and they destroy it. But there's been lots of work done for the last few decades showing that good management of animals through rotational grazing, what they call mob stocking, or something called holistic management. And I'll touch on this briefly a little more in the course when we talk about animals in the home landscape. But livestock can be used to help increase organic matter of the soil, and also just by letting your soil go fallow, by letting it rest, or by doing crop rotations, growing a food crop one year and then a cover crop the next year. That's another way of getting produce out of your soil one year and then letting it rest and build organic matter. Or you can just go out and bring in organic matter, get the tree trimming services, or if you have a municipal composting program or your neighbor's leaves, whatever it is, just get organic matter and start composting it or mulching with it. So those are some important ways or easy ways of increasing the organic matter content of your soil, getting more carbon in there, and that will create the conditions for soil organisms to occur. So it's got more benefits, though. Even though we're adding mulch in particular to build organic matter, just speaking of one of my favorite things in permaculture is what we call stacking functions, where you do one thing, but it has a bunch of benefits that come with it. And so we're adding mulch that we're just adding because we want to build organic matter, but it does keep the soil cool, so it helps keep water, moisture in the soil. It keeps the roots a lot cooler so that your plants don't blow as much water into the air on hot days. It helps just make the yard more tidy by reducing mud. It can either suppress weeds itself, or weeds that grow up through mulch are usually really easy to pull. And it also builds the fungal content of the soil, mycelium, which are it's the body of fungi. The mushrooms are just a little fruit, and then these white threads down in the soil are mycelium, which fungi are so important in transferring minerals and doing all sorts of wonderful, wonderful things in the soil. They can transfer water around, transfer minerals, so by building the fungal content of your soil, you can help with a lot of soil problems or fertility problems. And just by mulching, that will increase the fungal habitat, so all sorts of mushrooms will just move in on their own, or you can inoculate this with special mushrooms that are meant to grow soil. Like there's a mushroom called garden giant. It's a stropharia mushroom. Stropharia anaerogosa, I think is the name of it. But it's an edible mushroom that's really good at helping to build soil organic matter and break down rough organic matter. Okay, so those are some ways of building organic matter and some of the benefits of doing it. And then to increase the mineral content of the soil, there are all kinds of amendments that you can add, really finely ground up ones or coarser ones. There's something called azomite, which stands for A to Z of minerals, something like that. But it contains like almost every element found on Earth except the radioactive ones. Right? It's principally from a seabed deposit, an ancient fossil deposit in Utah, but there's other places that have similar stuff. Rock dust, which are the fines from gravel making operations, the powder that is left behind when gravel is ground up. So you can get the salt rock dust and glacial rock dust. They're really high in minerals, and because it's so finely powdered, the minerals are released fairly quickly. And then there are a whole bunch of mineral deposits similar to azomite, like there's something called langanite. It's also known as sulfomag because it's got a lot of sulfur, potassium, and magnesium in it, plus some other minerals and things. And so you can add that to your soil. A type of ground up rock deposit called green sand, which is high in potassium and various other minerals. Rock phosphate, it's got phosphates in it. All of these are organically certified. Rock phosphate is then more processed by washing it with acids and things to turn it into triple phosphate and the different sorts of phosphates that chemical fertilizers use, that you can use the raw form. And then certain clays, particularly one called bentonite, it holds a lot of minerals on its surface. So you can add some of that clay to your soil. If you don't already have clay soil, like I have a very silty soil, so I can add some clay to it, and that's fine. If you've already got a clay soil, you don't want to add more clay. I'm sure you know that. if you have clay soil. And then there are animal products like bone meal, if you care to use those. Bone meal contains calcium and phosphorus and a lot of other things. Lime is a great source of calcium, as is gypsum. And then kelps and other seaweed products like that have all sorts of trace elements in them, all kinds of minerals. So these are all many of the things that you can get, that you can add to your soil to increase the amount of minerals in your soil. And now that I've gone through many years of being a fanatic about organic matter, now I've become a fanatic about minerals, because I know how to do the organic matter thing. And now I really want the minerals as the key to really good, healthy soils, nutrient-dense foods. So here's a chemical analysis of azomite, this fossilized seabed deposit found in Utah and other places. And you can see, it's got some aluminum in it. It's got barium, calcium, carbon, chlorine, iron, magnesium, manganese, on and on. And as you can see on the right, and in the lower part of this, it's got all these teeny amounts of trace elements in it too. Yes, it does have a little bit of lead in it, but it's way down there. I don't think you have to worry about how much lead there is, but it is just full of almost every element found on the surface of the earth, found anywhere on the earth. It's even got thorium in it. So, and it's organically certified, and I use a lot of it. I really like it. And even though it is a non-renewable resource, for now I'm gonna use some of it because it's available. And there are a whole bunch of others that you can get. You can get analysis done of rock dust to tell you what's in it as well. But, so that's azomite is one, and things like it are really nice tools for increasing organic matter. All right, so how do we increase our soil's ability to hold these minerals then? Because the way chemical farming works is you mix up water-soluble minerals, make them into some sort of salt solution, like ammonium chloride or potassium phosphate or something like that. Mix it with water and then pour it on the soil. And those are water-soluble, so they'll just wash down into the water table in the rain and contaminate wells. And anywhere where there's been a lot of chemical farming done for very long, the wells are contaminated. Like 80% of the wells in the US Midwest are contaminated with high to toxic levels of chemicals from chemical agriculture. So organic matter really is the way that we store and hold on to minerals, because what organic matter does is the phrase used by a really great soil scientist, William Albrecht, is he says they're insoluble, but they're available. In other words, they can't be washed away in water. They don't dissolve. They're insoluble. But they're available to plants because plants know how to, and microbes know how to get a hold of them. So I want to explain how that works a little bit. Just how do we increase our soil's ability to hold minerals? So what this means is, many of the minerals, many of the trace elements, and even major elements in your soil have a positive charge. You don't need to worry what that means at all. All you need to know is opposites attract. Positive attracts negative. Just as in so much of life, opposites attract. So when a positively charged mineral, of which most of them are, some of them are negative, like boron is negative, phosphorus is negative, but most of them have a positive charge. And they are attracted to negative charges. So the positively charged minerals, calcium, magnesium, all of these, ammonium, form of nitrogen, iron, copper, zinc, manganese, molybdenum, many, many more, they all have positive charge. They're called cations. Cat is a word for positive, and ion is what happens when you mix these things with water. It ionizes, so they call it cations. Not cations, it looks like it says cations, but the word is pronounced cation. And then if it's got a negative charge, it's called anion, and meaning negative, A against. To worry about that, cations are really what we want to focus on. But it turns out that certain clays and almost all decomposed organic matter has a negative charge. And so they attract each other. Clays and organic matter will attract positively charged nutrients like calcium, magnesium, ammonium, all of those sorts of things. So here's how it works with clays, like the photograph up there on the right is electron micrograph of clay that's blown up really big. And you can see it's all these thin little sheets. And this is blown up many thousands of times. So it's stacks of these little sheets that all have a huge amount of surface area on them. In the lower left is a schematic drawing of each one of those little sheets, or a couple of those little sheets. And within the sheets themselves, those little green dots and kind of magenta colored dots, those represent different minerals, cations that are stuck in the middle of the clay, and then also in between those sheets, because there's negative charges sticking out from both sides of the sheets, other cations stick there. So clays hold cations on their surfaces, and as you can see from that photograph, they've got lots of surface. So having some clay in your soil is a good thing. Gardeners who have a lot of clay in their soil say, oh, I hate my soil, it's full of clay. But I actually would rather have soil that has a little too much clay than soil that has too much sand in it, for example, because sand doesn't hold nutrients, whereas clay does. So clay is pretty good. Certain clays are quite good, but many clays are pretty good at holding cations and making these nutrients insoluble but available, because they don't wash off in the rain, but plants can secrete acids to pull them off of the clays, and many animals can secrete either acids or enzymes. Bacteria, fungi, and a lot of other little critters can secrete acids that will help pull those minerals off. And they only consume as much as the organism needs, and then they leave all the rest. So organic matter, as it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, this yellow drawing here, they call it colloidal particles. You don't have to worry about that. It just means pieces of something that have been broken down into tiny, tiny, tiny little parts. That's what the word colloid means. You can look it up if you want a more formal definition. But little tiny pieces of organic matter are covered with negative charges. They've got all these negatively charged oxygens and other things on them. And so they attract all kinds of cations, like magnesium and calcium and potassium and all sorts of other things. And those cations stick to the surface of the organic little particles of organic matter. And then they're carried around and they're stored in the soil, and it's the same deal. They don't wash off in the rain, but all sorts of plants and other organisms can remove those nutrients as they need them and then leave all the rest. So it's a really beautiful system of these cations are stored in the soil in an insoluble way, but they can be delivered to living things at just the rate that they're needed. And the rest are left in the soil. It's a really, really beautiful system. So that's the basis of organic farming, is building up the organic matter content and the mineral content by tying your nutrients to the soil organic matter so it won't wash away, so it won't contaminate the rivers, so it won't kill stuff, and build up the soil instead of depleting the soil the way chemical farming does. So this leads us to, there's one little technical term that I want to get across here, which is something called cation exchange capacity. And that is simply the ability of anything in the soil, like an organic matter particle or a clay particle, to hold and exchange cations, calcium, magnesium, iron, all those things, potassium. So the cation exchange capacity is a measure of the soil's ability to hold nutrients and swap them around so that they're available for other things. And the higher your CEC, in general, the better your soil is at holding nutrients and offering them to your plants and other things that need them. So you want to build up the CEC in your soil. And again, you do that mostly by adding organic matter. All right, so how do you increase CEC? As I was saying, you add organic matter and these mineral supplements. And then how do we know if we need to increase our CEC? Maybe it's just fine. Maybe the cation exchange capacity is just fine. Do a soil test. And I would recommend anyone with a garden, if you haven't done a soil test, do a soil test. The little things that you buy in the hardware store by various manufacturers, I'm not going to mention any brand names, they're not very good. they'll give you an accurate reading pretty much of the pH, but the tests like for nitrogen and phosphorus and things like that, those are really variable, and there's just so many it depends aspects to it that you're probably not going to get a very accurate number. You might get a good accurate number on the potassium test, but not on nitrogen and not on phosphorus. You really want to send it to a pro. So here is a soil analysis from some soil samples that were sent to a place called A&L Western Labs, and that's one of the big labs in the U.S. Every country has soil testing labs. And in the US, you can find out where they are if there's one near you by going online. The US has a system called the Agricultural Extension Office, and every county pretty much in the US has one. And you can call your extension office and ask, how do I get my soil tested around here? And they will tell you. Or you can just find out online where the nearest available soil test is. Usually you have to mail a sample in. One of the good places in the U.S., if you can't get directly to A&L, is another outfit in California called Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, and they will. This is one of their tests that they send it out to A&L. But as we read across the labels on the green here, sample ID, lab number, then we have the amount of organic matter, and the percentage rating, like 4.0 is high, H is high, L is low, M is medium. And so this particular sample had 4.0, and then a different sample had 1.5, and another sample had 3.5% organic matter. So those are, okay. They could do better with the 1.5. And then phosphorus, they have two different tests for phosphorus. And again, it says the phosphorus in one sample is medium, one's high, one's low. And on across the line, potassium, magnesium, calcium, sodium. There's the pH. Wow, really acidic soil here, 4.7, 5.2. And then further to the right, you see the cation exchange capacity. And these numbers here, like in the teens, the top two, 19 and 24, those are good numbers. That's a good soil. That's a very decent CEC. 13 is okay. I'd like to see it higher, and I'm sure that these people are working on it. And then there are various other things that you need to do a little bit of reading to find out about cation saturation and things like that. And then they've got trace elements in the second row down here. Nitrogen, well, nitrogen's a major element, but sulfur, zinc, manganese, iron, copper. And a test like this will run you between $35 and $50 if you're in the US. And I highly recommend doing one, because then you won't be guessing about how to take care of your soil. You'll start, instead of just going out and getting a bag of fertilizer and adding it, maybe that fertilizer is high in potassium when you've already got a lot of potassium in your soil. You don't want to add a lot of potassium then, because you could actually make your soil kind of toxic. So start with a soil test and then fine-tune your soil. And a good soil test, like Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, will actually give you recommendations of what to add in order to correct these problems. Like here, this is the same, one of the samples from the same test, but there's actually some information here about what can be added, how much to add, these sorts of things. So they'll give you the results, and then they'll give you a bunch of recommendations of sources to be able to help the soil that you've got. So do a soil test, and it's money. It's $35 or $50, but it'll just save you so much trouble. And going to the doctor because your soil has been depleted of minerals and making you unhealthy, that's going to cost you a lot more than $50. So a little preventive medicine here. All right, so how do we decide how to build soil? And again, permaculture, as I've said, is a decision-making technique. It helps us decide what techniques to use in order to do things. And so I use the zone system to help me decide what kinds of techniques, which technique to use to build soil. Like, here's an illustration out of my second book, The Permaculture City. And the little yellow square there, that's a very small patch. That's like 2 little keyhole beds. So it might be, that might be 10 feet by 10 feet or 10 feet by 15 or something like that. And what I do is, making good compost and adding a lot of nutrients to the soil, it's a fair amount of work. And I don't want to do it over large areas. When I was younger, yeah, it was fine. If I've got interns or volunteers or work traders, great. Let's work them hard. And, we've got plenty strong backs and we could do a big area. But if it's just me, I'm going to do a small area really intensively. So I would make just the best compost that I can make and get, a huge mineral mix of all sorts of things and all kinds of amendments for the soil. And then I would just baby this little patch of a couple of raised beds or a couple of keyhole beds to turn it into just something unbelievable. Because that's where then I would grow my leafy greens and stuff that I want to have just maximum nutrients in. But, I'm probably going to want to have a garden that's bigger than just those two little tiny beds. So I'll do a larger area, and that's this kind of brownish orange color there at the top, which is where I will sheet mulch or spot mulch. And sheet mulch I will describe in a minute, but I think a lot of you are familiar with it. It's just putting down a big layer of mulch on things and then letting it break down. And sheet mulch is limited really by how much mulch material can you get. Like one pickup load is really only going to cover, 100 square feet, 200 square feet, something like that, maybe even less, maybe only 50 square feet, because you want to sheet mulch deeply. You want 8 to 10 inches of sheet mulch. You want, a third of a meter or a quarter of a meter or so of sheet mulch in order to, because it's going to break down in just an inch or two of soil. So you want to do a small area well with sheet mulch rather than do a crummy job of a large area. And so the area that you can sheet mulch is really determined by how much mulch can you come up with. But you could do a pretty good sized area, a few hundred square feet if you've got, like if someone brings by a dump truck load of wood chips, you could do a pretty large area. But you're limited by the materials you have, and eventually you get tired or you won't have enough help or something. You can only do so much sheet mulching and mulching in general. And that's when you move to the third level, which is cover crops, which, as I said, are plants that are specifically selected to build organic matter and build nutrients. And there you can do 100,000 acres if you want. You want to do it with a tractor and a seed drill and things like that. You can, and that's what they do in the major farming areas, is they cover thousands of acres in cover crops because it can be done by machine. And then you can either till them into the soil, or you can do a chop and drop. You just slash them down with a scythe or a sickle or a mower, and then leave them in place. Or you can cut them down and then bring them to a compost pile and compost them and then bring the compost back if you want to do that much work. But what most people do is grow the cover crops and then either turn them into the soil or leave them on the surface of the soil as a mulch. So this is how the zone system helps me decide how much to do. Is how much energy have I got and how much compost have I got. I'll do as big an area as is practical of this super intensive, highly mineralized. I'll try and put minerals down everywhere I possibly can, but there's kind of a limit. And then, then I'll do sheet mulch over a somewhat larger area. And then if I've got a really big area, I will start doing cover crops. But the zone system helps me decide which ones to use first. So composting, I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with composting. And again, there are lots of books on it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I want to show you what I've learned about composting as the keys, the things that are kind of make or break the difference between a good compost and a compost that fails. You want to start with the right mix. In an informal way to know that you've got the right blend is half green things to half brown things. Because what you're looking for is you want to start with about 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen, because what's going to happen is that number is going to gradually go down. It's going to be 30-to-1, and then some of the carbon is going to go off into the air as CO2 as it gets decomposed by various soil organisms. So it'll go down at 25-to-1, 20-to-1, 18-to-1, and then it'll kind of stabilize at about 12-to-1. That's what you're shooting for. If you start with 12:1, it's going to get kind of funky really fast and go down, you know, to 8:1 or something, and that's too much nitrogen. The pile's going to stall and it's going to smell bad. So with 50-50 green to brown, like green, grass clippings, fresh stuff, and brown would be dried up things like wood shavings or straw. The one brown thing that is actually classified as green is manure. It's brown in color, but it's really got a lot of nitrogen in it. Green actually means higher in nitrogen. Brown means higher in carbon. So you want that blend. So and it just turns out happily that 50% green, 50% brown gives you the right ratio. And you need the pile to be big enough. If it's not big enough, it doesn't get hot, so it won't sterilize seeds, it won't break down properly. If it's too small, the heat just bleeds out of it really quickly, so you want it to be a cubic yard or roughly a cubic meter or bigger. 4 feet on a side is a really good number. If you've got more, you can make it 4 feet wide, 4 feet high, and as long as you want. Moisture is really important. Everything needs water in order to grow, and compost is the same. You want to have the moisture level roughly a wrung-out sponge, and that actually is a lot of water. If you're starting with a lot of brown matter, you know, a lot of straw, dried leaves, things like that, you can actually add a lot of water to it when you're building your compost pile, and you'll find that it doesn't get very soggy. And then it needs air. So what happens as a compost pile is finished, if you build it right, within about a week, it gets really hot inside. It gets up to like, you know, even 140, 150 Fahrenheit, or what is that, like 50 centigrade, 55 centigrade. And that'll burn up the oxygen inside it and the moisture inside it really quickly. Those bacteria and fungi get going at a really high rate, and they consume the oxygen, and then oxygen can't penetrate in very quickly, so it'll start to cool, and when it starts to cool, then you turn it and to bring in more oxygen, and you can add some more moisture if it's dry at that point. But you want to make sure that it stays aerated. Then you want to protect it from the elements so it doesn't get too wet in the rain and it doesn't dry out or bake in the sun. And so, you know, just keep it moist, turn it to keep aerating it, and make sure that the carbon nitrogen is pretty balanced. If it stalls, if it just doesn't heat up, usually it's either too dry or there's not enough nitrogen in it. So you can add some urine or some manure or something that's high in nitrogen, or it may need to be moistened with some water. It might need to be aerated and turned, but more commonly it's that it's dried out or that it doesn't have enough nitrogen. If it's stinky, if it smells like ammonia or worse, then it's probably too wet and probably has too much nitrogen in it. So you might want to let it dry out. And as it dries out, some of that nitrogen will gas off and it'll kind of come back in balance. But those are the key points with compost. Then sheet mulching. This is a photo drawing from Gaia's garden, and it's what I call an ultimate bomb-proof sheet mulch because it's got like everything under the sun in it. You don't have to get that fancy. You can get as fancy as you want. You can use any of this, half of these ingredients. The 2 key ingredients are simply a sheet, as in cardboard or thick layers of newspaper, a 1/4 inch or so of newspaper, and then 8 inches to 12 inches of some kind of organic matter, like wood shavings or that sort of thing. Wood chips, all you have to do is make sure that the top couple of inches don't have seeds in them. So it's not hay or straight horse manure or something like that, or else the seeds are just going to sprout and you will be planting grass instead of mulching. But and there's a downloadable file at my website at tobyhemenway.com on the ultimate bomb-proof sheet mulch. If you don't have Gaia's Garden, which you should if you're taking this course, but if you don't have Gaia's Garden, you can download the sheet mulch PDF that I have there. And then cover crops, and I've given this out as a handout so that even though it's a little small here, you'll be able to read it as a handout. But these are all the different cover crops that Peaceful Valley Farm Supply sells. And they come in many different varieties. Some of them are strictly to build organic matter. Some of them help build nitrogen. Some of them are cold season, some of them are warm season, some of them are perennial, some of them are annual. And the catalog for Peaceful Valley will help you choose which ones to use under what circumstances. So there's no end to the different kinds of cover crops that you can get and the different things you can use them for. Now, I am also providing for the people who are taking this course, I have evolved my own super mineralized mix, and I've evolved this over time. And this year, I feel like I've got it finally tuned in. I built some new raised beds this year. We moved to a new place last summer, and so I built raised beds over the winter and just built kind of custom made the soil in them. And I made this this mix that's based on something from soilminerals.com, but and I've given them credit at the bottom of this. But it's these are all the ingredients, and it's a lot of stuff. And I wanted it to be perfect. You'll notice that further down here, there's monoammonium phosphate, there's calcium nitrate. Those are not organically certified, and I am okay with small amounts of chemicals, really small amounts, because they give a quick blast of fertility. So they'll kind of jumpstart your fertility, but I only use teeny amounts, and mostly I'm relying on much larger quantities of the longer term stuff like feather meal and blood meal and bone meal and things. Organic fertilizers. This pre-plant 757 is just one form of an organic fertilizer. There are lots of others, but that's the trend that I use. Kelp has lots of minerals. Everything else in here is for minerals or for its ability to raise CEC. And I add a few other things as well if I'm totally custom building soil, but you as a participant in this course will get this mix and you can apply it. This is the amount to apply per 100 square feet, or you can build the whole raised bed yourself with a bunch of other ingredients and add this to it. All right, so that is an hour and a quarter or so of soil. And what I have here is our homework, so I will put that up in just a moment. But I want to open things up for Q&A about soil at this point. So we will happily take questions. So get your questions together. And I want to give you the homework while preparing for questions. The first thing as a homework, just do that jar test. Get an idea, what's the sand, silt, and clay ratio of your soil? And then let's decide on your design project. What do you want to be designing for the rest of this course? If you've already, and make a base map of whatever site you use. If you've already made your base map, if that's what you did for homework for this time, then refine it, make it nicer. Oh, and by the way, my helper who was supposed to help me go through the homework was not available, so I'm way behind, or not way behind. I've got about 2/3 of the homework graded and back to you, but there's about 1/3 of them that I will finish up tomorrow. So sorry about not being able to get everyone's homework back to them with comments, but I'll get the rest of them tomorrow. And then homework assignments would be to read chapters 6 and chapters 9 in Gaia's Garden, which are 2 chapters on multifunctional plants and guilds, or you can just search the web if you don't have Gaia's Garden and do some reading on multifunctional plants and permaculture's plant guilds. And if you do have Gaia's Garden and want to do a little bit of extra, chapters 7 and 8, which are also about guilds and plant communities and things like that. So those are the homework assignments. And all right, let's take a few questions for a little while. All right, what do we got? Anybody got questions out there? Happy to take them.
I imagine there's going to be a lot.
I don't think so. Soil is
I have a lot of questions, but can I ask you 2 questions quickly?
Sure.
The cardboard. So the cardboard, there is a lot of controversy about it. If you can talk, what is it good or what you believe is good to put underneath. And the other one is that when I do like keyholes with bricks or stones and stuff like that are kind of high, and I have cheap mulch like for clients, I find out I live in South Florida, so after a year it really goes down like by half of it. And
right.
The problem with the bricks are like the soil is just half of it, and then the plants are like there, so you cannot really build it up on top of the plants. I don't know if you can help me like
Yeah.
find a solution for that. Yeah, those two questions.
Okay. Yeah, cardboard. It's most cardboard has the inks that they use in cardboard are from soy, and so it might have GMO soy in it, but by then it's fairly well purified. The big issue with cardboard is some of the glues sometimes can contain urea and formaldehyde and things like that. But the cardboard will break down very quickly, and if you've got a good layer of mulch on top of it, most of those compounds, and urea is actually a good plant fertilizer, it will break down fast. The formaldehyde will go off into the air. So it's a potential concern, but mostly because you've got all this organic matter in your soil, it breaks down so fast that it's undetectable within a couple of months. As long as you keep your sheet mulch wet. And then, yeah, the thing about sheet mulch is that it shrinks over time fairly quickly. And so what I do is for the first 6 months or so when I sheet mulch, I do small stuff. I usually cover crops into it. And yeah, sheet mulch often needs to be renewed for the first year or two, just to add some more. And that is one of the drawbacks to it, is that it slumps. It just shrinks down smaller and smaller over the first year. And it's kind of hard. What some people do is they'll pull from the sheet mulch aside, cut an X in the cardboard, and then bury their plant down in the actual soil, and then kind of push the mulch close to the plant, but not quite back around it. That way, when the mulch does shrink down, the plant is not completely bare and exposed. So yeah, there's some trickinesses about the first season of getting sheet mulch started. But by burying the plants a bit, that can help get around that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you.
Right. So
there was a question came up about volume, whether it's volume, the mix, 50-50 mix, is that volume or weight?
Oh, that is volume, 50-50 by volume, right? I get technically probably I measure it, make it all perfect, but 50, a bucket of this and a bucket of that, or a shovelful of this and a shovelful of that. So it's done by volume. Good question.
Nellie asks, what cover crop do you recommend for South Florida climate?
Right. There are a bunch of sort of subtropicals. There's something called sun hemp. And let's see, Sudan grass is I think I can't remember if it's perennial or annual, since I don't live there. I don't work with too much stuff like that. What I would do is go to Peaceful Valley Farm Supply's website, groworganic.com. I'm pretty sure it's .com rather than .org. Groworganic.com, and look at their information on cover crops, because they've got terrific information on exactly what cover crop to use for what climates. But there are a number of, like pigeon pea is a great, both edible and it's a good nitrogen fixing cover crop type plant. A number of the beans, bell beans, can do fairly well in humid subtropical climates like that. And then there are a whole bunch of sort of semi-perennial vining nitrogen-fixing crops whose names I'm forgetting right at the minute. But getting Peaceful Valley Farm Supply's guides to cover crops that are right on their website would help you immensely with those decisions.
Frank's also asking if you know of any about in kind of desert areas like Phoenix. What would be a good
there are these great dryland mixes. There are, it's a mix of grasses and again, it's hard for me to remember exactly what the nitrogen fixers are, but that would be the same thing. Is Peaceful Valley has very specifically dryland mixes that they use on the eastern slopes of the Sierras and places that are even drier than that. So there are specific mixes for that. So that's where I would go. Again, I don't store all this information in my head, but I can pretty generally always point you towards resources where you can get it, and that's where I would go for that.
Jen has a good question. She says, I'm surrounded by timber, so I will have a lot of leaves this fall. I was going to move them onto the ATV trails because I don't have any gardens yet or know where I'll put gardens. you have any
Mhm.
better ideas on what I could do with all these leaves?
Yeah, I think doing what you're doing and finding a good place to pile them up, even pretty good sized piles, they can begin to break down over the next few months. And leaf mold is a dynamite compost. Just piling up a bunch of leaves, drying them out, and if you can keep them a little bit moist so that they will compost, you could even, if you want, inoculate them with something like Myco Grow is a fungal mix from fungi.com, Fungi Perfecti. There are lots of effective microorganism inoculants. There is the technical name EM, but you can find a lot of those, and you can inoculate your organic matter with that. But yeah, I would just find places to pile this stuff up and let them start to break down. And what's nice about that is they won't be as heavy. They won't be as bulky. Next year, you'll have a nice collection of leaf mold, leaf litter, or leaf compost. It's great stuff.